Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Sermon, and I'm thrilled to have you here today on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. This show is for those who are wanting to learn more about creating financial wellness, and we're going to take different life cycles and we're going to explore them financially and emotionally, because personal finances are not about the money, if you can believe that or not. Rather, they're usually about the emotions that are associated with your finances. Although we might have a fairly general discussion, we'd love to hear from you to make it more personal and more relevant. You can call in. You can reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. Or you can post comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or wherever you're listening live. We're going to explore today how to positively co-parent. And this is such an important conversation. I'm really excited to get into it, not just because I love my kids, but also because it is really so much to do with your happiness as an individual, your children's happiness and well-being. And today our guest is Jill Kaufman from Princeton Counseling and Parenting Center, who is a co-parenting expert. Jill, welcome to the show. I am really happy to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Hirsch. I'm so happy to be here.
So, Jill, I'm going to ask, before we get into some of the questions, if you can just talk a little bit about your background so people really know where you're coming from, and then we can kind of dive in.
Sure. So I'm a divorce coach. I'm a therapist. I'm an author. I'm also a trained divorce mediator and a parent educator. And I have been through it all. I've been through divorce. I've been through parenting three young boys. Now they're all adults. And I know how hard divorce is. And I really have made it my mission to help others go through divorce and not have it so hard.
So I love that. As you know, my background also has divorce, and that changed my career. I think there's such a power behind somebody who's been there, done it, feels it, and then can help you get through it. I just think there's so much power and passion behind that. So thank you for sharing that. Kind of just diving in, I guess. How is a co-parenting relationship different than the relationship you had when you were married with your spouse, or now your ex-spouse?
So it's a completely different relationship. And, when you're married, you have an intimate relationship. You work together and care about each other and build, a family together. When you're co-parents, you are working together, but it's not that intimacy. It's a very different relationship. I tell people it's like your coworkers, you're
Right.
working together. And a lot of people have trouble transitioning to that because you've been together for how many ever years, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30. And you are used to dealing with each other in a very emotional way. And if you do that, you're not going to co-parent well. You're going to have, other issues come up that are really irrelevant. The past is not relevant anymore. So you really want to focus on the present and focus on your children. And, that's where you have successful co-parenting, when you can do that.
So I like that phrase you said, the past is not relevant anymore, because I think it's easy to get stuck in what you know, and it's easy to get stuck in the past, especially when emotions are so high sometimes. So I do think that's such an important point that I wanted to reiterate. So when is the best time to start thinking about co-parenting? And, also, is this like I'm air quoting for those listening, online, but is this like an after divorce thing that needs to be figured out? And isn't this something that in many ways should have maybe happened or be happening all the way through from when your kids are born?
Well, yes, co-parenting, if you think about it, what I think about it is child-centered parenting. And yeah, in that respect, it should be from when children are born. And that doesn't mean children run the house. It just
Right.
means that you think about the children's needs before you think about your own. So I think that should be happening all throughout. But it's different when you're co-parenting after divorce, because you are thinking about your own needs. I mean, you always have to think about your own needs. That's, your needs are important too,
Right.
but you have to put aside your own needs so often in divorce when you're co-parenting. You have to think about, if your child wants to spend time with the other parent and it's your parenting time, you have to say, okay, I'm willing to not see my child today because they really want to see the parent. I mean, in my case, my son wanted to watch, a football game with his dad. I'm like, shoot, I don't get my night with him, but that's not the important thing.
Right.
The important thing is what's best for him. And he really wanted to see the football game with his dad. So I put my needs aside and I always said yes. So, you really have to think about the child, and it's difficult a lot.
That is, I think when people put together parenting plan in the kind of going through the legal process, sometimes we forget that. And, it's what works for me. And you're right. If it's a drain on the kids or it doesn't work for the kids, it's not going to make your life any simpler. So focusing on them can absolutely have direct impact on making your life easy in that way as well. So how do you co-parent with somebody where you're going through this conflict of divorce and negotiation and emotions are high? How do you co-parent with someone like that? How do you get them on the same page?
Well, so when you're going through divorce negotiations, it's most of the time conflictual. I mean, that's just the way it's structured, unfortunately. Right. People are adversaries in a way. You try not to be, you want to work together, but if you have $1 and one parent gets it, the other parent doesn't get it. If you have time with your child and one parent gets it, the other parent doesn't get it. So it's like, it's really a conflictual relationship, but you have to separate that from what you're doing with your child. I mean, you really have to compartmentalize if possible. And I know it's really hard to do that, but you have to say, this has nothing to do with my child. This has to do with these negotiations. And those negotiations are really, they are like a business negotiation,
Absolutely.
You really have to take the emotion out and think of it logically and be clear thinking. And so that is really separate from what you're doing with your child and the co-parenting relationship. And if you need to get your emotions out, which you do, you can't go through an emotional divorce and just be, oh, we're getting along great. Like you have to get your emotions out. So I encourage people to journal. They can talk to friends, family, therapists. You can say anything you want when it's not in the presence of your child or your other parent. And you need to do that. It's a lot. So, but once you're co-parenting and you're interacting with your child or your other parent, you really have to be respectful.
So I will tell you, the first thing my divorce attorney said to me was that this is the dissolution of a business that you are emotionally attached to. And in the beginning, I thought that was harsh. I thought it was cold. And the truth is, it's in many ways what you've just said. I think it was very accurate, and that's a lot of hindsight. So obviously, you and myself, we're trying to help people look forward and understand what's ahead of them. But I thought that was really good advice, actually, when I think about it. So very much in line with what you're saying. So one of the struggles, I think, with co-parenting, and this is no surprise, people are different, but can you share some tips maybe for when you have different parenting styles and there are different rules in each house, because that can certainly complicate the issue as well.
Absolutely. So you don't have to have the same rules in each house. That would be impossible for you to, agree on all the rules in both of your houses. But you should have some big main rules and come to agreement on them if you can. Like things about homework or maybe bedtime or screen time, some big things. If you can come to agreement, that would be really helpful so that children have some consistency. But for the things that you don't agree on, that's okay. You have to be respectful of the other parent, and you tell your child, these are two different houses. You're going to have different rules in each house. Like, I was very particular about like where my kids ate, and they couldn't eat anywhere but the kitchen. But my ex didn't necessarily feel that way. So that's okay. I said to my sons, they could do whatever they want at his house as long as it was okay with him. But these are the rules in my house. But you want to be really clear about your rules, and you want to either have it, listed somewhere, or, on the refrigerator, or, right, talk about it and sit down and talk to them about it. And you can even have a family meeting with your ex and your children and explain to them what the rules are in each of the houses.
I would say, something else is, it's probably, depending on the kid's age, of course, but it's probably not a huge surprise for them to find out they're going to be different rules in different houses, right? Because they've experienced their parents since they're born, and they've seen that they're not the same people. So it's not going to be this huge surprise that people have to be so scared of. I think sometimes we get nervous. We know we're putting our kids through some, a difficult period of time sometimes. But I think that communication that you're talking about goes such an enormous way, and quite honestly is appreciated by the kids. And we'll talk a little bit more about communication as we go. I want to kind of finish out this topic of differences, or as you said, that the system is a little bit set up, the process, to be adversarial in some ways. So I think everybody has heard about high conflict divorces and the challenges of divorcing a narcissist. And I think sometimes, terms are thrown out a little loosely, but there are definitely high conflict divorces, and sometimes it's pieces of the divorce, not everything. Does an adversarial or contentious divorce proceeding impact the ability to co-parent long-term?
It can. And that's why, you really want to try to do it as, have as least conflict as possible in the divorce negotiations. And I recommend mediation as one of the tools to avoid conflict, because when each of you have attorneys and you're communicating through your attorneys, there's more conflict a lot of times. And so like there could be miscommunication. Like if you think about like telephone, the game telephone, you're telling your attorney, your attorney's telling their attorney's telling them, then they're telling their attorney. I mean, there's many more people involved, and there's bound to be miscommunications. I was working with a client, and after they had used attorneys, they met with me because they had some parenting issues they needed to work out. And within one session, we were clear that they actually were in agreement. They didn't realize that they both agreed with each other because there was miscommunication between the attorneys. And the mom said to me, she goes, I wish I would have talked to you 5 months ago. I would have saved $60,000. So you really have to be careful about the process that you're using, and recognize that even if you're communicating through attorneys, you can talk to each other. So
it's so important. My last show, we had people from the Lilac Tree, which is an organization in Chicago that deals, they're like a major resource for people in the Chicago area related to divorce. And we were talking about building your team. And just like you said now, she had come to you 5 months later, it could have been a $60,000 difference. I hear that kind of comment all the time. Having the right people on your team, having more people on your team sounds like it's going to be more expensive, but so often gets you a better result at a much cheaper price tag ultimately. But you speak to the right people. I always tell my clients, you don't want me representing you in court. I'm not an attorney. That's not my expertise. And the same with this. Your attorney is not trained in learning how to co-parent or setting the stage for co-parenting. You should really be talking to an expert in that. And I think that's important. And, this leads me to a question where sometimes there is this miscommunication, or it seems like there's a different focus, or we're not on the same page, and often we're not on the same page. How do you bring your spouse's focus back to prioritizing the kids and bringing them kind of back to that, as you said, kid-centered discussion versus parent-centered discussion?
So that's really difficult because people who are married especially know how to trigger each other.
Yes.
And so, they can say one thing, then you get defensive, you defend yourself, and then you attack them, and it's like, and you're off, and you're just in a place where you really don't need to be. So what I tell people is, number one, breathe, don't respond right away, listen. If you're on the phone or if you're texting or you're emailing, you don't have to respond right away. So take a few minutes, think, take some deep breaths, and think about how you want to respond. You don't want to be reactive. You want to be responsive. And once you get into that reactivity, it's really hard to communicate. So if you find yourself that you can't calm yourself down, a great way is just to say, look, you know what, can we talk about this tomorrow? I just need some time to think about it. But if you're not reacting to your ex, no matter what they say, it won't escalate. So you can really control this by your reaction and your behavior.
And I think that's true. You can't control their behavior in any way. I mean, we all know that, but we can try to not be triggered, or we can, control our emotions. And I think one of the things that I have found very helpful for my clients is, if you're going to have a difficult conversation or something that's so important, think about it ahead of time. What are maybe some of those triggers, or what are some of the buttons that might be pushed through the conversation? I think that's an enormous piece for people to think about as well, because you can, when it comes in, you already expected it. You can almost like internally chuckle to yourself, like, yep, I knew that one was coming, right? But how do you control your emotions when you're co-parenting with a high conflict ex? Because they're going to push every button they can until they try to get something out of you, right? So
yes. So one of the tricks I tell people is, high conflict or narcissistic people really enjoy the power. They
Yes.
really want power. So ask them their opinion on things. Ask them what they think about your child, what they think about, the situation, and just listen. And this gives them a feeling of power, and this gives them a feeling that they're, somehow in control of the situation. It doesn't mean you're agreeing to anything. It doesn't mean that you are allowing them to control the situation, but you're making them feel a little bit like they have power. So that's one thing. The other thing is, you could say something to one of these people who are high conflict people, and it could be nothing that you would think was triggering, but they can take it triggering. They can take it as an assault on themselves. So they can be very sensitive to this. So you really have to be careful about how you phrase things. And I've seen it happen in session. I do co-parenting sessions all the time, where one of the parties is saying something that's really not a big deal, but the other person takes it. And this happens, even with people who aren't high conflict people, because people are sensitive. So you really have to be careful how you phrase things. One of the parents that I work with, that it's a good example of this, is the mom kept saying, "Can you babysit?" And he really did not like being called a babysitter. He was
Right.
the father, and that just made him totally reactive. And I don't think she meant anything by it, but you really have to be careful and know what's triggering the person, so you avoid those terms and try to do it as respectfully as possible.
And a difficult thing to do, I think, but if you're able to, in a nice way, guide them in how you want to be spoken to, it is a little bit of that message as well, I think. And again, being sensitive to understanding that they may be triggered by the way you respond to that, So, Jill, we have to pay some bills before we do and take a quick break. Can you just share, how can people get a hold of you, a quick, easy way? And then we're going to go straight to break.
Sure. So my email is info@divorcecoachjill.com. My website is www.divorcecoachjill.com. And my phone number is 609-400-2888.
Great. Thank you. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Thank you. Host for the Financial Wellness Hour, and we are speaking with Jill Kaufman from the Princeton Counseling and Parenting Center, and we have covered so much today already. We are talking about positive co-parenting and how to co-parent, not just through the after it's finalized, I guess, but even before that, and how to set up that co-parenting together. And in the break, I wrote down some of the things we've been speaking about. When I say we've been speaking about a lot, we've been speaking about what is co-parenting, which I think is very often misunderstood. Setting it up and how do we do it, controlling your emotions, working with people through high conflict and the challenges that come with that, and working, or I should say, discussions when you have a narcissist involved, controlling your emotions, reading the situation, and above all, which is not easy because we are human and we do want to take care of ourselves as well, but keeping your kids as the priority and the focus of the conversation. And that can be in so many different ways, not just if it's emotional, but as simple as how are we going to split our time? How often a week are they going to go from one to the other can play in. You know, some kids don't want to chop and change every couple days. Others say it's fine. Some want to be a week on, week off, but understanding your children becomes a big piece of this when you're having your discussions. So again, we've spoken about quite a lot already, and we've got more to go. So let's get back into it. We spoke a little bit, as I said, about that communication, the flexibility, the co-parenting. And so how flexible, or should you be flexible with parenting, with the parenting schedule? So if your spouse asks for a change, you mentioned a personal experience earlier. Can you talk a little bit about the flexibility around your parenting schedule that you should have?
Yeah, so I think parents, when they make a schedule, they think it's the schedule and it has to stay. And, if you change it, there's a problem. I understand going by the schedule for consistency's sake, and most of the time that's important. But, life happens. Kids have things that come up. They have things that they want to do. They may, like a girl might want to get her nails done with her mom, or the son may want to do something like, watch a football game with their dad, or vice versa, who knows? But, that those things, the kids shouldn't have to suffer because of the divorce and not be able to do those things. And I've had parents who say, no, this is my day. I'm doing this. I'm not letting you do that with your other parent. And that's not, it's just, think about it from the kid's point of view. It's just not fair to them. They have to deal with so much with the divorce, going back and forth to houses and, explaining I've had kids who are ashamed that they don't have one house with an intact family, and they have to deal with that shame. And there's lots of things emotionally that kids have to deal with. We have to try to make it as easy for them as possible. And if we can be flexible like that, it's so beneficial for the kids. And they feel tension, even if you don't say anything to them, even if you try to be respectful, they feel it when it's tense. So if you can make things easier on them by being flexible, that's the best thing to do for them.
Yeah, I agree. I love the way you put that as well. It's not an easy situation, but sometimes, you got to understand where you're coming from as well. Is it a little bit of a bias? Is it a jealousy? Is it what is triggering sometimes that response, is something to be aware of as well. So in many ways, I think co-parenting is focusing on the children, setting up the best environment for them. We've covered that a little bit already. How much information, and this comes a little bit to that communication we were speaking about earlier, how much information should you really be sharing with your children? Because there's so many details you don't want them to know, and obviously there are things they need to know. So it's a fine balance, I guess, right?
Absolutely. And I made the mistake of not giving my children enough information because I thought, they should know what's going on in the divorce, and in general, that's true. They shouldn't know about the negotiations. They shouldn't know about the finances at all. But, they should know why you're getting divorced. If they're old enough and they can understand, what happened. Most kids are really curious about why, and they don't understand. Like, was it something I did? Was it something, one of the parents are bad? You know what I mean? Like they conjure these things up in their heads and they don't understand. So it is good to give children reasons why you guys are getting divorced, without really speaking negatively about the other one, because you really want to be careful about saying something negative. And you can say things like, mommy and daddy were very different people, and we really tried to make it work for a very long time, but X, Y, and Z didn't work. He thought that was important. She thought this was important. You don't want to go really down deep into the details,
right.
But I made the mistake of not saying anything, and my kids learned some things that were not true. And then, as they got older, I had to tell them what things were happening, because they have this whole other story in their head.
Right. And I think, again, taking that burden off of them is so important. They're going through so much already, and keeping it age appropriate as well. You probably wouldn't, and I'm stating this more as a question. I'm guessing that when you speak to a 15 or 18-year-old, you're going to talk to them in a very different way than maybe a 5-year-old or, you know, an 8-year-old, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I'm sorry I didn't mention that. When you have very young children, you shouldn't go into too much detail.
Right.
They don't need to know all that detail. But as they get older and they ask questions, you can fill them in. But yeah, when they're young, when you first tell your children, you should tell them together, and you should talk about how you're going to tell them. And if it's young children, you want to say something like, you know, we both decided that this is better for us, and we love you guys, and it has nothing to do with you, but this is what we're going to do. And, you know, that's pretty much enough for children, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You know, as they get older and they ask questions, then you can respond in different ways. But yeah, my kids were all teenagers and up, you know, so it was a different situation for me. But you do have to take the age of the child into consideration. Absolutely.
Right. And, you know, I'm just thinking also age appropriate in this, but most people, many, you know, will move on. At some point, they're going to start dating again, whether it ends up in marriage or not. They're going to, you know, meet others, as I guess the terminology, significant other. Can you talk a little bit about maybe how do you introduce a significant other to your children? Is it something you should be telling the spouse, the ex-spouse, I should say, ahead of time, to like controlling the message a little bit? I'm just not sure, you know, how do you really do that? That's not an easy one to do either.
That's a great question, because people do all sorts of things. And you can make agreements actually in your marriage settlement agreement about how you're going to do this. And I do recommend you talking to your ex before you introduce any significant other to your children, just as for courtesy and to be respectful of them, so they know what's going on, so the child doesn't come home and say, oh, I met, you know, so-and-so, and they're totally taken aback. So yes, I absolutely recommend you talking to your ex about introductions to children. But what I tell people is make sure it is a long-term, serious, committed relationship before you involve the children at all. And that means, you know, a significant amount of time you have to be dating before you involve the children, if possible. You know, I say 9 months to over, which is a long time. And I know a lot of people are like, no way. I'm not doing that. I'm not waiting that long. But I really think that, you know, introduction, you know, for a little time is not a big deal if you want to do that sooner. But when you're spending a lot of time with that other person and the children, I mean, if the divorce has happened years before and the kids are doing well, then it's not as important. But if the divorce is new, or, you know, you want to have them get adjusted to the divorce before you introduce someone new into their lives. And you can see that person as much as you want when the children aren't around. But when the children are around, you know, you really want to be careful and think through and make sure this is a serious relationship, because you don't want the children to suffer another loss, you know, get attached to someone and then, you know, that person isn't there anymore, because the divorce is a loss for them, and this would be another one.
So your second date should not be dinner with the kids, right? No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But I think very, very important what you're mentioning is you really do need to read the situation. You know, younger kids versus older kids, time since you've been divorced versus maybe, you know, there's been a couple years. The longevity of how long you've been seeing this person does play in. I guess maybe it's even if you're in a community where, you know, it's somebody that they know, could even play in, you know, there's so many factors, I guess, what I'm getting at. So
yes,
great information, though, really great information. So obviously through our dialogue, it's readily evident that this is a complex situation. I mean, kids in general, I always am amazed kids grow up in the same home and are so wildly different, right? You know, so you need to take all these different things into consideration, as we've just said. Sometimes you can't even see clearly through the fog of the emotional whirlwind that's your life at this point. Can you share a little bit how you work with people, like, you know, what are the benefits? How do you help them? What are some of the things that they really, you know, should be thinking, oh, I need to speak to someone like Jill?
Absolutely. So I work in it several ways. I work individually with people, and that's helping them understand the divorce process, make a plan for themselves through the divorce process, clarify their priorities, learn how to manage their emotions, focus on the future, develop a new life for themselves. So I can do that individually with people, but I also have a group coaching program that's really powerful, where I love it because people support each other. And when you know and hear what someone else is going through, you feel less alone. You feel like, I'm not the only one going through this. And it's so powerful when they connect and help each other that way. So there's different reasons why you would do individual versus group, but both of them are really helpful because, like you said, divorce is one of the most stressful things anybody has to go through, and nobody understands that until you go through it. And you need support. And so having someone who has the background and experience, it's so overwhelming. You have to deal with all these things with your children, all these decisions you have to make, all these financial things, let alone if you're working and taking care of your children. It's way too much to handle on your own. And yes, an attorney can help you with the legal aspect of it, but the attorney doesn't help you with the emotional aspects of it. I know an attorney, and he said, people come to me and they talk about their feelings, and I say to them, I'm willing to listen to feelings, but you're going to be paying me a hell of a lot more money than you would be paying a divorce coach or a therapist to help. And plus, I don't have the training for that. So,
Right.
Too many people will do that with their attorney. And when you have a divorce coach who can help you with that, number one, it's much less expensive. And number two, we know how to help you, and we know how to get you to have a plan and a focus on what your future life is going to be like. So I do those two things. I also do co-parenting. I work with couples who are struggling with their co-parenting relationship. And I also have a book which I use in my group coaching program. I'm Getting Divorced, Now What?
Yeah, I was going to ask you to speak about that, and I've shared a few of your blogs that have got very good responses as well. But do you want to just touch a little bit more on your book as well?
Sure,
That would be helpful.
So I was doing the same thing with people over and over again. And I was like, I need to put this in some way that people can get it, where you don't have to pay to work with me, but you can get this information for a pretty reasonable price. And it's basically going through all the stages. So the initial emotional stage, where you're overwhelmed and you really need a way to manage that feeling and that overwhelm, anger, shame, sadness, all the stages of grief that you're going through. So the beginning of the book helps you with the emotional part. Then it's helping you develop your sense of yourself and your self-confidence back, and decide how you want your life to look like, and really go through what your priorities are for your future life, and develop a plan to meet those priorities, to meet those goals. And also I have in there how to avoid common divorce mistakes, which a lot of people make, including me. And at the end is more kind of like pulling it all together and really being, having a clarity and hope for the future.
Right. So I will say the book is very comprehensive. I will say, it's great to get all the information you can. I'm a huge proponent of educating yourself. But, one of the things you mentioned earlier that you don't get from a book is when you feel alone, it feels worse often. Or, working with someone like yourself or coming into a group like yours is you've got a guide, you've got sounding boards, you've got reality checks. There's a lot more from that human interaction, obviously, than what you're going to get out of a book. Now, again, Jill's not on call 24/7. You may want both. You may want the book to read through. I'm struggling with this. I know it's covered, but at the same time, I don't want anyone thinking a book is a substitute for really the expertise that somebody brings as well. So I just wanted to throw that out. Jill, we have to start wrapping up, unfortunately, but can you share one more time, how can people get in touch with you? And then we're going to wrap up the show. It really flew this time.
Yes, it did. My website is www.divorcecoachjill.com. Email info@divorcecoachjill.com, and phone is 609-400-2888.
Jill, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. You've shed such great light and quite honestly, a very, very important and not easy topic. And you've simplified it in a lot of ways, which is in itself not an easy thing to do. So thank you for that as well. With emotions so high, the fog of divorce, the unknown, helping people the way you do, I really appreciate the way you simplified so many important ideas. And obviously the help you bring to people as well. And as you said, this has become your mission in life, and it's a great mission. So thank you for that. I am your host. Thanks for the Financial Wellness Hour. Please do reach out to me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. Please reach out with questions for me, for Jill Kaufman, our guest today. I look forward to joining you next week, and happy holidays. Anyone listening, great. Please have a great holiday season. Be safe, and we will speak to you next week. Thank you.